Okay, so it's 7:34. We will get started. Good evening all to the weekly huddle session 42. My name is Anup Agrawal. I am an interventional cardiologist at Care Hospital, Hyderabad. I'm joined by my colleague and co-host for the huddle, Dr. Praneeth Polamuri. The huddle is an unscripted audience level interaction where we address common clinical scenarios, mostly revolving around a clinical case. We aim to keep the discussion patient and practice oriented. And for that, we typically pick up a clinical case or a topic, and we restrict our discussion around that so that we focus particularly on that particular patient. The basic premise of the huddle is to bring our casual hallway discussions to a more organized platform like this one and share our ideas. While we do welcome science and guidelines, with the huddle, we intend to help a physician translate established knowledge to clinical practice, particularly taking local factors and practice patterns into account. In a way, we are not trying to figure out right or wrong, but we're trying to figure out why you take a particular decision and to understand your thought process behind it. We host this session every Wednesday. This is our 42nd session. And for today's topic, I have presented a case where there is a young lady with differential blood pressure. To facilitate today's discussion, I have my guest here today. His name is Dr. Rajendra Varaprasad. He's a rheumatologist at Yashoda Somajiguda. So the way we start the session is I brief the clinical case. I ask Praneeth to give his initial impression, and then we take impression or we take suggestions from our attendees. And somewhere in the course, I will ask my guest to get his opinion, and then we'll ask Dr. Somaraju sir to get his opinion as well. So Praneeth, I will tell you the case in the same fashion as I had it in my clinic, and then you can take it over from there. This patient I saw about 3 to 4 months ago. And these are the cases where once they come into your clinic, you do feel nervous treating because it is very difficult for us to get a good sense of where to start and where to end. So I will tell you my dilemma, and I have put in some of those dilemma in the invitation as well. So we'll go one by one. This is a 26-year-old female. She lives in one of the small towns about 200 kilometers away from Hyderabad. She took her mom to a clinic, and she happened to get her blood pressure checked as well. So she otherwise does not have any problem, nothing. She just accompanying her mom at a local physician in her small town. And to everybody's surprise, her blood pressure was different between the two arms. I'm appreciating the physician who actually checked blood pressure on both her arms. On the right side, her systolic pressure was 150, diastolic was 70. And on the left arm, it was 100 by 64. So certainly 50 millimeters of systolic gap was there. She did not report any active symptoms. And at that time, he got some basic investigations done. And I will tell you the numbers which are available to me. CRP was 3.1 at that time, and ESR was 40. Her hemoglobin was 10, rest of the hemogram was okay. Her renal profile, including creatinine and electrolytes, were okay as well. So the physician over there, he started her on corticosteroids and told her she needs to come to a higher center for further workup. He also advised to get an echocardiogram done as well as an MRA of the large vessels. So by the time she came to me, she already had an echocardiogram report and an MRA report. I have put in my examination finding on her, other than the differential blood pressure. I could appreciate a subclavian bruit. I could also appreciate a pulmonic stenosis murmur. To me, at least, that's what it looked like. It was a ejection systolic murmur over pulmonic area, which was radiating towards subclavian and also in the interscapular region. Her S1 was normally split. Her S2 was normal with no diastolic murmur. And her distal feet were a little bit feeble. There was no any joint swelling or rash. She had a puffy face. She had been on steroid for about a month now. That was her only complaint, that her face looks a little bit puffy. Her MRA report, and I'm just putting the pertinent findings here. Left subclavian stenosis. There was left subclavian artery. There was 40% stenosis in the first part till vertebral origin, and after that there was diffuse narrowing. So left subclavian takeoff had moderate disease, and after that just diffuse narrowing. MRA did not scan anything further. There were collaterals coming off of lima going to axillary region. That is exactly how it is described in the MRA. Collaterals coming off of lima going to the axillary region. Right subclavian artery is normal. Left common carotid has 50% stenosis. The rest of the arch and intracranial vessels, they were all normal. Her echocardiogram was reported 2+ aortic regurgitation, but rest of the echocardiogram was also reported normal. So she comes to me with these findings, and now I have to kind of make sense of whatever I have got. There are few questions that she has, there are few questions that I have. So the issues that are going on is this lady has wedding planned in 2 months. She actually visits with her prospective husband, and they're trying to figure out what is the best course of action. She certainly plans to go to get pregnant in the coming time. So the questions which are coming up is she's asymptomatic, she's feeling fine, there is no any active constitutional symptoms other than differential blood pressure. Just leave her alone. Or the question is, what would be a reasonable workup at this time? We already have MRA report with us and we have echocardiogram report with us. Is there any drug therapy that she needs to be on? And do we perceive any issues with wedding or pregnancy going forward? So these are the issues that I have to highlight. She does not have any chest pain or discomfort of any other sort. She does not complain of claudication. She is leading otherwise a normal life. So Praneeth, give me your impression of what you think about this case, or if you think that you would be as confused as I was. At that time in our hospital, we did not have a rheumatologist to refer the patient to. I did end up sending this patient to some other rheumatologist, but let us get a cardiology and a physician perspective, then we will go to a rheumatology aspect. Praneeth, all yours.
Yeah, no. Good evening, everyone. So, firstly, definitely not a comfortable case to deal with, but let me share my thought process of what all is going on in my mind, and let me put my thought process. So, as with the history, what you have given, no-brainer, the diagnosis is a Takyasu arthritis. When we talk about Takyasu arthritis, what we want to know, what I would like to know, one is about whether the disease is active right now and what is the extent of involvement of the Takyasu. So activity based on the clinical and lab parameters. Clinically, what we talk about keratodynia and presence of any fever, probably any associated arthritis or something, which I believe are not there. So clinically, there is no active sign of is about lab parameters, inflammatory markers which we look into, the C-reactive protein and ESR, which has been mentioned. ESR is elevated, C-reactive protein is not elevated, but either of them to be considered or taken into consideration active inflammation. The next thing would be to look at the involvement of other vascular territories, subclavian being the commonly involved vessel, followed by other vessels, carotids and aorta, probably renal arteries and others. So in the discussion, what I would like to know is about the distal pulses. I don't know whether you mentioned that, whether patient has any distal pulses palpable, and second thing, was there any differential blood pressure between upper and lower limbs?
Okay, so Praneeth, her left radial I could barely feel. It was very feeble. Right radial was very nicely palpable. Distal pulses in the legs I could feel, but they were feeble. And I did not check blood pressure in the lower extremities.
Right. So that means there is an abdominal aorta involvement, be it at thoracic or abdominal level, producing the differential blood pressure in upper and lower limbs. So something like middle aortic syndrome is something which we look into it. So having said that, considering activity in the form of elevated ESR, though patient is having no symptoms, still I would consider starting her therapy, and because she was already started on steroids, the only thing is look for the response to the steroids in the form of repeating an ESR and C-reactive protein. How much did it come down? If she is responding to steroids, then we probably have to switch over to steroid sparing immunosuppressants, which is where I'm not so comfortable, where I would try to take the help of my rheumatology colleagues, and then followed by other issue involvement of doing interventions and whatnot. Now, the questions which you said about her, whether she can get married or not. First, I would definitely say yes, she can get married. Again, depending on the involvement of organs, the issues will be in terms of conception, pregnancy, and others. Echo LV function seems to be okay. Renal functions, I believe, are okay because the labs are fine. So at least at this point of time, I would say no major threat in the form of pregnancy and conception. And treatment, I already answered. Pregnancy and conception I answered. I think these are the questions that you asked me. Any other questions, I would be happy to answer.
No, and Praneeth, I think that is a good start for the discussion. I'm just going to ask opinion from other cardiologists and physicians in the forum before I get a rheumatologist on board to get his suggestion. Dr. Srinivas is here with us. Dr. Srinivas is a cardiologist at Care Banjara. Sir, you heard the case and you heard what Praneeth had to say. He certainly wants to repeat the inflammatory markers and he's in the favor of treating this patient. Other than inflammatory marker, he also wants to check abdominal aorta, but nothing more aggressive on it. Is it something that is in the same line of thought as yours, or you would like to do something else differently? Remember, this patient is asymptomatic, but the question is we have to so-called clear her for conception and wedding and whatnot. And Dr. Srinivas, what would you suggest?
Partly I concur with Dr. Praneeth. What he has said is the lower limb pulses being on the lower side, we certainly need to rule out an abdominal aortic involvement, but I'm not sure if the disease is active already has developed collaterals to the left upper limb and the ESR is elevated, but you have suggested that the hemoglobin is low. So partly the ESR being elevated could be because of the anemia per se. Patient does not have any constitutional symptoms. One way of knowing whether the disease is active is by doing a PET scan. And then if the PET scan shows evidence of activity, then we are justified in giving steroids for a long time. And before we think about giving a nod for her future pregnancy, we need to evaluate her regarding the disease activity per se, as well as involvement of the abdominal aorta, because we need to be sure of the placental circulation and then involvement of abdominal aorta and the use of steroids and all before we send her for pregnancy.
Thank you so much, Srinivas sir. Let me get a few more opinions before I go to Dr. Rajendra. We have Dr. Shankar with us. Dr. Shankar is a senior physician who has been a regular attendee of our huddle. Dr. Shankar, what is your viewpoint if this case has to come to your OPD? How would you take it up?
Good evening to all. it is told that she is asymptomatic, but with the 40% of left subclavian artery stenosis, we have to elicit, we have to poke, or we have to have some leading questions to ask her regarding limb claudication or subclavian steal syndrome. These things should be elicited. And one more thing, this is very habit of palpating all the peripheral pulses and auscultating for the bruit, and examining all the four limbs for the BP for blood pressure measurement initially. But I appreciate the physician who has diagnosed a differential BP in upper limbs. That leads to many differential diagnoses. So here the young lady in the second to third decade of her age, and with all these features, so a rare possibility of Takayasu is there in our mind. And so I doubt whether she is still asymptomatic with this amount of disease. We have to have some leading questions to ask regarding the limb claudication and subclavian steal. These are the essential things to come to a diagnosis of some subclavial steal syndrome.
Shankar sir, just for the completion's sake, could you guide us through what are the typical leading questions that you would ask, understanding that she lives in a typical tier 3 household? When I probed her daily activity, she doesn't do much activity per se other than her routine work at home, and there she could not tell me if there is any deficit. Give us some tips and tricks of how you elicit these kind of symptoms to help us in our OPD, understanding that these are typical cases.
Especially most of the patients what we have seen, definitely they complain of limb claudication. They complain of some pain in the upper limb while combing, while washing clothes, while doing work, while sweeping. So whenever that limb is put to work, definitely there will be some amount of ischemia which is being precipitated, and she will complain of some pain in the upper limb. That otherwise known as that is a claudication. This will be eliciting in most of the cases, especially when the subclavian artery is involved. And the second thing is the subclavian steal syndrome also we have to elicit, and most of the times when they use the upper limb, there will be steal of the blood will be there from other side of the circulation, cerebral circulation, through the vertebral artery, tries to enter into the subclavian portal. So there will be patient complaints of some amount of giddiness while using the limb, while working. So sometimes the patient may give history of some transient ischemic attack also. These two things, to my mind, should be elicited before we say that the patient is asymptomatic, because it is very difficult to treat an asymptomatic patient. We see so many asymptomatic conditions in our cardiovascular disease, like silent ischemia, silent myocardial ischemia, silent hypertension. So we are supposed to treat them. But when this patient, if she is asymptomatic, if you want to investigate further also, she won't be cooperative. And if you want to give any line of therapy, either corticosteroids or immunosuppressive drugs, she will be very much reluctant, because in our setup, patient, when the patient is symptomatic only, they will start taking drugs. Already she has got a steroid phases, and within 2 months she is going to get married also. So these, unless we know the activity of the disease, and unless she is symptomatic, we cannot proceed further in this case, I mean. Other investigations are there, but the only thing is, unless the patient is symptomatic and unless the patient is ready for any amount of investigations or any cytotoxic drugs or steroids, then only we can proceed further, because she is going to get married and she may conceive in the near future also. And one more thing also, I want to, is there any congenital narrowing of subclavian artery? That also we should think in this case, apart from Takayasu, because there are no clear-cut diagnostic features are there in this case to suggest that it is only Takayasu. So I give another differential diagnosis, that is a congenital narrowing or congenital absence of subclavian artery.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shankar. Some of the points are certainly worth putting in our daily practice in terms of how to elicit some of the upper extremity symptoms. To continue with my other attendees, sir, I'm going to mute you for now. Dr. Malindra Swami, if you can hear me, could you please unmute yourself and share your thoughts about this particular clinical case? If you couldn't catch the clinical case, please let me know, and I'll brief you the case one more time. Dr. Malindra Swami, if you can hear me, could you please unmute yourself and share your thoughts?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
You are able
Yes.
to hear me?
Yes, sir. You are audible. Please go ahead.
Sir, I think the possibility of patient is asymptomatic. I cannot tell because how she came, what was the attention for her to come to the hospital, sir?
So, she went to a local physician to show her mom. They were suspecting that her mom may be having COVID. And while in the clinic, some enthusiasm happened and she checked her own blood pressure, and that's how they found out that there is differential blood pressure there.
Okay. Then incident are detected to be hypertensive, young age hypertensive.
Yes,
Hello, sir?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Then possibility difference of upper limb, either it is congenital coarctation of the aorta as a differential diagnosis.
That certainly can be entertained. Yes, absolutely. There could be a coact causing differential blood pressure. Here the problem
blood
is,
pressure, you are telling ejection systolic murmur, whether it is continuous murmur in the back.
that was what my initial impression was. Yes.
Yes, yes. That is what I'm thinking, sir.
Yeah.
In adult means Takayasu is only left to 50% subclavian artery stenosis may not cause such symptoms as such.
That's right. That's right. But remember, we only have MRI reports so far, and that is where we are trying to see what else we should do to explore further.
This is what I'm thinking. Takayasu is only other cerebral vessels and other involvement vessels are very less likely involvement, means less likely of Takayasu in my view. It is congenital. My possibility of congenital hypertension.
Absolutely, that is something we should be thinking at the same time. Yes, and this is the same.
Cerebral vessels are not involved except left subclavian artery.
That's correct. There is left carotid and left subclavian. Those are the only two arteries which are involved.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, and I think what you are saying concurs with what Dr. Shankar was also hinting, that we should probably be thinking of something congenital as well. Absolutely right.
Yes, yes.
Okay, let me actually go to Dr. Rajendra. Dr. Rajendra is a rheumatologist at Yashoda Hospital. Sir, thank you for joining us. And You heard the clinical case, you heard some of the initial discussion. What is your initial impression if this case had to see you, if this patient had to see you? How would you take it up? And if you could guide us about your thought process. Dr. Rajendra.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Good evening. Yeah.
Thanks for including me into this discussion, sir. And it is very interesting. So I think I will as I will continue with what already other senior colleagues and cardiologists, physicians, they have given their inputs. I concur with all of them. So what I would do, like Pranit said in his opening statement, to see the extent active disease and the damage. In a routine clinical practice, the active disease after the clinical examination, I think you have already mentioned there is no carotid carotidine. So what in a asymptomatic patient, I'll do a thorough clinical examination to look for historically if there is any systemic features like fever, weight loss, and myalgias. If these are there, it is very easy. We can say patient is having a disease activity, even though, however, the pulse is in a diagnosed patient. And here, after clinical examination, with the inputs what you have given, I take it as patient doesn't have carotid tenderness, and her other vitals are stable, except for she definitely has hypertension in the right arm. And an MR angiogram was done, and I did hear from you the disease activity signs, which usually in MRA we see the vessel wall edema. So I take it that there is no vessel wall edema from your report what you have given the inputs. So if we consider the available data, like clinically no active disease, no clinical signs, but MRA also not showing any active vessel wall edema. So in this case, and now when she came to you, patient is already on steroids, 40 milligram. I don't know what the dose. I think it is 40 milligram. Patient has Cushing, so she might have received moderate to high dose of steroids, and the ESR is 40. The ESR 40 is the only thing which makes me think: do I need to further evaluate and see if there is ongoing disease activity, which might not be picked up by MRA or the clinical pictures. So in routine clinical practice, the better investigation would be a PET scan of the whole body to see the vessel wall inflammation, which is very helpful even in the pulseless state also. So in this case, that will help us. And if the PET scan is normal, then it is unlikely patient is having an active disease. So, and there also, and the timing of the PET scan, now if patient is already on steroids, it is little difficult to assess the disease activity, but there are other caveats like in elderly patients, atherosclerosis can cause false positivity and high dose steroids can cause a false negative PET scan. So that would be my workup, and I will also include, because she is having hypertension, and in Takayasu it is very difficult to measure the central blood pressure or the actual blood pressure, actual pressures. So a renal Doppler and a size of the kidneys I would like to assess to see if there is any renal cause of hypertension, and that would be helpful. And coming to theoretically, not non-clinical practice, the present standard scoring what we use or what is standardized is ITAS, Indian Takayasu Arthritis Scoring System to 2010. It is a very simple one. It is in this patient, it may not be. We can use as a baseline. This score gives us a numerical value, and that will help as give us a baseline value. And this patient score will be 8. So anything more than 6 is considered as active, but scoring system has its own fallacies. Those are my considerations in this patient. And so yeah, if shall I continue, sir? Do you have any questions?
Sir, whatever thought process you wish to share, you can, and I can feed you with more clinical information that I got. So if you have thoughts to
So
share, you can go ahead.
was a PET CT done, sir, for this lady?
No, PET CT was not done. So that is the first visit. PET CT is not done yet.
Got it.
And I will fill you some of the questions you asked. So she was started on 40 milligrams of prednisone, and by the time she came to me, she was on 20 milligrams of prednisone. And I had the privilege of getting some labs repeated. I'll just tell you some of those numbers so you can continue with your thought. Her CRP last month at the time of diagnosis was 3.1. When she came to me, it was 1.3, and they both are within normal range. Her ESR was 40 at the time of diagnosis. On the day when she visited me was 12, 1, 2. And the only thing I did was that echocardiogram, which I showed you.
Yes, sir.
And my next visit, which was after 2 days, I also had a CT scan of her big arteries because I wanted to evaluate on the lines of what other people suggested. So I will share with you that information as well, and then you can give us your thoughts. So
Sure.
more information that what I have is her distal left subclavian artery is occluded at the junction of subclavian and axillary artery. There is 100% occlusion. So her subclavian anatomy is such that at the takeoff, there is about 40% stenosis up to vertebral. From vertebral onwards, it's diffusely diseased. And at the juncture around axillary, it is 100% occluded. It reconstitutes later on towards the distal axillary via collaterals. And those are the collaterals which are coming off the lemma and reconstituting distal axillary. Her descending aorta was noted to be having 30 to 40% stenosis. And she had very mild osteal celiac disease. Her rest of the visceral arteries were normal. We scanned up to femoral bifurcation. And from top to bottom, rest of her vasculature was okay. I did mention that her left carotid was about 50% as seen on the MRI, and the same thing was seen on the CT scan as well. Her coronary arteries were normal without any signs of stenosis or any aneurysm or anything of that sort. So those were all the information given to me. And on MRI, there was no sign of wall edema, at least till that time. And I don't have PET scan at this time. This is that first visit on day 3 that I'm seeing her. So that is all the information that I have got, sir, for you. You can take over from here.
Yes, sir. And about the renal vessel, sir?
Normal. So the only
Normal.
visceral vessel there was problem was mild
Celiac.
osteal disease of celiac, and that middle aortic syndrome, that was also 30-40% disease involving about maybe 15 millimeter of the descending aorta, mostly around diaphragm. That was the only involvement of the aorta.
Okay, sir.
Please take
Okay,
over.
sir. So the ESR has suddenly came down, probably with steroids, and renal vessels are normal. So from the damage point of view, if from the activity point of view, because patient has already been started on steroids, and now her ESR is normal, I think from the management point of view, I think we can slowly start tapering her steroids under observation over the next 2 or 3, at least next 3 to 6 months. I mean, steroids maybe we can taper to 3 months to very low dose like 2.55, and I think we can observe her after as we taper on. Coming to steroid sparing agent, this patient, because this, I think I will observe her only the next 6 months, whether she really, if at any point of time I feel like she is not, she's having some symptoms or her inflammatory markers are getting elevated, I will just observe her after tapering steroids. If they are elevated, then I will definitely consider adding a steroid sparing agent. Because we don't know how the natural course is going to be. What I usually find is if a patient, my experience, if a patient comes for the first time with an active disease, then anyway patient will be started at the inception itself as a steroid sparing agent. But a patient who was incidentally found out, giving starting immunosuppression at all, even the steroid also, it's not, as this case proves, it's not an easy decision. But once someone has started steroids and patient responded, it gives us a clear idea that patient, at least the inflammatory markers point have subsided and patient is responding. So I will carry on with that and go on with tapering. Because and if patient doesn't have, she had a osteal stenosis, what celiac artery, I think that's what I understood, celiac artery osteal stenosis. So if she doesn't have a bowel angina, and if she doesn't have a left upper limb claudication pain, I think this is just tapering of steroids and follow-up would be a plan as of now. And coming to the other questions at the beginning, what we want to discuss about marriage and pregnancy. Marriage, of course, Takayasu will not hamper infertility or pregnancy unless patient is having uncontrolled hypertension because of damage, because of the arterial damage. So hypertension would be the only concern. Even active Takayasu itself is not a problem for becoming pregnant, but if under follow-up, we usually see that the patient goes into remission before planning pregnancy, so that patient will not the baby will not have IUGR or low like features which chronic inflammation can cause. Yeah, yes, sir. But now that is what I feel.
Sir, one particular question I have. So Srinivas sir mentioned about getting some sort of evaluation for potential placental circulation in the future. Is it something that is worth even thinking? Is it something that we can evaluate or we should evaluate or something of that sort? Your thoughts on that?
Sir, unless that descending aorta is having significant narrowing and patient has lower limb claudication, that is a surrogate. But 30, as you said, in this patient, 30% narrowing, I don't think it will cause a problem. And it is like, it is a straightforward thing. I think if there is low placenta insufficiency due to Takayasu with this, in this patient, it is not a concern.
Particularly,
if there is significant, yes, sir, please continue.
Particularly in her case with the CT scan, it didn't show any problem with the internal iliac artery, but then we know that in the CT scan, they typically don't track all the small vessels.
Yes.
So is it something that particularly one should be looking at, or it's not even worth going after?
No, sir, we don't look into it actually, because Takayasu, as we know, the large vessel disease. So medium and small vessel are very rarely involved. These are medium vessels.
And then one last question: if this patient, if you do end up putting steroid sparing agent later on, realizing that this patient may opt for pregnancy, is the thought process of azathioprine versus mycophenolate versus something else? We probably, as a cardiologist, won't need to know the details of it, but if you could just give like a 2-minute rundown of the medications.
Definitely, sir. First, I will speak about this patient. I mean, okay, we already spoke about it. If I have to start a steroid sparing agent in a patient who is going for pregnancy, azathioprine would be the drug of choice because it can be taken during pregnancy, though the drug is a relative contraindication, but in most of our autoimmune diseases, azathioprine is a safe medication to be continued. And tacrolimus is one other drug, but it is not a first-line drug we use for Takayasu arthritis. But the previously, most often we used to use, even now we use methotrexate, azathioprine, mycophenolate, these are the first line medications as well. There is a lot of data from CMC where they started using mycophenolate since many years now, almost 20 years. So with that, their data and the confidence of using mycophenolate and it having an antifibrotic mechanism also in the vessel wall and lungs and everything. Some people prefer mycophenolate. So that efficacy wise, there is no difference between any of these medications. Practically speaking, from the data itself, but only some theoretical advantages are there. So the safety concerns, safety is better with mycophenolate. It doesn't cause cytopenias, it doesn't cause hepatitis, which are risk factors with azathioprine and methotrexate. And if patient is not planning pregnancy in near future, or near future means at least for 1 to 2 years, then mycophenolate or methotrexate or azathioprine, anyone can be given. But now the present practice is many clinicians are preferring mycophenolate because of the recent data. In pregnancy, no doubt, azathioprine. We usually, so how long to give? I don't know, that also no one knows, but as a rough estimate, we usually see that patient is in complete remission, that is no inflammatory markers, no systemic features, no new vascular lesion for at least 2 years before considering tapering of the immunosuppressant lesion. I think I went further ahead. The medications, apart from these 3 medications, tacrolimus, as I said, that we use. And nowadays we are seeing many refractory cases also, and we also have now biologic therapy which do not have the side effect of organ injuries. So among biologic therapies, infliximab, that is TNF inhibitors, infliximab, adalimumab, they are widely used in refractory cases. Tocilizumab, it is an IL-6 inhibitor, that is also commonly used. Of late, there are the newer molecules, but data is less. Like JAK inhibitor, tafasitamab is also tried in few cases. But in a refractory case, TNF inhibitors will be the first biologic which can be used. We have seen many patients responding to it, and they're fast acting. The only thing we have to screen for tuberculosis. And the second line biologic is tocilizumab. These are and rituximab is also tried, but the data is less for that. So these are the non-biologic drugs and biologic drugs. Steroid is the sheet anchor. These are the immunosuppressants available to us.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. I think if I understand you and summarize whatever we discussed, that this patient should probably go for a steroid taper over 3 to 6 months. And if there is no sign of disease recurrence, we can probably leave her alone. If there is sign of disease recurrence, then we go for a steroid sparing drug. And in her case, probably azathioprine is a reasonable choice. Although if she decides not to conceive, then we have other options as well. And in the future, if she does recur, then we have biologics. And of course, for all of that, we would require expert help, because I don't think we as a cardiologist would be comfortable with any of the either biologics or, for that matter, even non-biologics like steroid sparing. So, Dr. Rajendra, is there any other comments that you would like to put on before I ask my attendees for any questions that they have?
No, that's all, sir.
Okay. May I ask Dr. Somaraju for his opinion about this case, about the discussion, what we did, and anything else that, sir, would you like to add in our discussion?
Anup, thank you very much for asking me, and it's a very interesting problem you brought out. It brings out some of the issues related to the philosophy of medicine, not just Takayasu. I have not much disagreement on most of the things that are pointed out. When we talk about, when you think about medicine as being practiced as disease-centered medicine, a girl which is about to be married as a person, that has to be kept in mind. If I were the first physician who encountered her, or even earlier or later when it happened, we would like to talk to her and the boy who is going to marry her as to what they expect to happen. And secondly, the ASR of 40, the value of 3 or odd of say CRP is not a great elevation. A lot of our patients without any disease have these type of inflammatory markers. The best inflammatory marker for this disease is PET scan. These things that is the best way of not only recognizing the initial inflammatory process but also the follow-up. But I would, if I were treating this patient, I would, if we have to practice person-centered medicine and not disease-centered medicine, I would have a meeting with her and the family, including the boy who is going to marry her. What do they expect out of some of these things, and what are the issues related? And if they want to get married in spite of this problem they have, and also pregnancy has no influence, actually has some positive influence on Takayasu's outcomes most of the time. Pregnancy is not a contraindication. If they plan to get married still, after knowing this, I would suggest to them to have early pregnancy and not postpone it later after you use steroid and all that with those borderline elevations of inflammatory markers. When blood pressure in the right arm is 150/70, I would want to recheck the blood pressure. If this is really 70, the AR is being underestimated. If any more questions, I would want to answer, but issue like this should be person-centered, not disease-centered alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And that was, in fact, other than disease per se, this was one of the other uncomfortable scenarios that at least I faced in the clinic, partly also because being a little bit outsider, if I don't have a very good grasp of the local community practices, beliefs, and the culture, so it becomes a little bit difficult to grasp that idea and kind of reciprocate in a very conducive term, as to speak. Having said that, the good thing that happened was with this patient, her prospective husband did come. And certainly that did alleviate some of the concerns that I had, because I could see the overall support that she was getting from the family, which was quite relevant. PET scan I did not do in this case because she was already getting high doses of steroid. And in a cost sensitive society where I already realized that there is high chance of this PET becoming false negative, I decided to postpone the PET scan for a later phase of her life. She's still in the steroid tapering regimen right now, where I'm giving her 2.5 milligrams of prednisone every other day currently. And I believe in the next couple of weeks, she will be steroid free.
Anup, can I interrupt you?
Yes,
I'm
sir.
not talking about PET scan now. If I
Yes.
encounter this patient at the first instance I was talking about.
Yes, absolutely. That would have been a good idea. I still appreciate what the physician did over there in terms of at least picking up the problem to a certain degree and going with it. But it did open a lot of deficiency that I had as a cardiologist in terms of how I look at cardiovascular disease per se, and did put me through a lot of questions that I couldn't answer at that point of time. And over the last 3-4 months, things that I understood and incorporated in my practice. Praneeth, your hand is up. Is there something you want to add or comment? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, two questions in particular in relation to discussion of Takya, so probably not related to this question. Now that this patient is diagnosed to be having hypertension, she definitely needs treatment for hypertension. few of the patients whom I treat with Takayasu, the difficulty in managing their hypertension, and second thing about how well we are controlling the hypertension. Because sometimes, at least I have one patient who had bilateral subclavian stenosis, where the blood pressure measurement becomes difficult or challenging. So where how do you know that the targets of blood pressure and the drugs to choose, and those are the practical difficulties to challenge, and any thoughts or what is the individual experience of evaluating the efficacy of the treatment and the drugs that we use for managing hypertension?
So Praneeth, I think you bring up a very relevant question, and I don't know if I have an answer for you. I'll ask Somaraju sir about his opinion. The question, if I have to generalize, is patient who has got bilateral subclavian artery stenosis, there isn't a better way of knowing what their central pressure is and how to titrate medications for those patients. And sir, if I could ask one question to you as well, a 26-year-old female should not have any degree of aortic regurgitation, and she was supposed to have 2+ aortic regurg on echo. And as you rightly pointed, that maybe her AR is actually underestimated. Is that a reflection of the same systemic vasculitis affecting the ascending aorta, or is an incidental finding, or should we be exploring further on it? On her CT scan, certainly her aortic valve seemed to have a normal pathology without any degenerative features. So if you don't mind sharing your thoughts on these two things, one question that Praneeth had and the other one that I have. Somaraju sir.
Easy answers to what is being talked about. When you have somebody has aortic regurgitation or mitral regurgitation, they also give you, you can estimate the central aortic pressure through them, at least systolic pressure. And there are methods of estimating central aortic pressure by different means these days, but echo Doppler will also help you to estimate LV systolic pressure and also LV diastolic pressure by AR and MR. And accordingly you go by. But when somebody has a significant peripheral vascular disease, particularly say subclavian or carotid disease, etc., you have to undertreat their blood pressure. Don't overtreat their blood pressure, otherwise they will go into ischemic attacks and even stroke.
And sir, what do you think of aortic regurgitation as a marker of vasculitis in her? Is it something that can be correlated, or you think that's just an incidental finding?
So-called normal aortic regurgitation, normal mitral regurgitation, normal TR and pulmonary regurgitations, we know of in Doppler echocardiography with their high sensitivity these days. But any degree of aortic regurgitation in a young person is abnormal. In an elderly person, that's not abnormal. That's part and parcel of the aging process. This is abnormal. This is a sign of disease.
Thank you so much, sir. Anybody has got any questions? They can please unmute yourself. One
Yeah, no,
question
I have
that,
one more question.
yes, Dr. Shankar.
No, this is Praneeth.
Yeah, Praneeth, sorry, go ahead. Praneeth, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So one question to Varprasad. Sir, about me being an interventional cardiologist, so my discussion on doing intervention on this patient when required, where patients who are symptomatic and they have disease, the hesitancy for me is that you do not want to intervene on them when they're having active disease. So is it always mandatory that we should do a PET scan or and look at the activity, or is there can we rely on other markers, and the how do we kind of get the clearance for intervention if the patient has an indication from a rheumatologist point of view?
In between I missed your voice, but I'll try to. So if patient, some patients are refractory. Even we give all the available immunosuppressants. Sometimes it is very difficult to control the disease. So keeping that in mind, so what the data as of now, the knowledge says that an active disease, any intervention can cause a dehiscence or a dilatation locally. So for rheumatologists, what practice we do is to keep, if a newly diagnosed patient who you diagnosed to have clinically active disease like inflammatory markers elevated systemic features, first time patient is coming, and you are sure and you are very sure that patient is having active disease without PET CT also, then we try to give her immunosuppression and steroid sparing agent, and try to the ideal time would be anytime when our inflammatory markers are lot less. Normal is ideal but lot less, and the steroid dose is bare minimum, like 5 milligrams or less, or no steroid would be a better it was ideal scenario, because we don't know how long the disease goes into a complete remission and a complete stable remission, because there is a thought of stenting. Most of the times it is either a renal artery stenosis or any stenosis which is causing local organ ischemia. So that is also pressing. We have to take a call based on the pressing need also. Like if it is an hypertensive emergency, if it is a patient is having a raising creatinine levels or very other organ damage, if there is an impending organ damage and your hypertension is uncontrolled, so in sometimes we try to do it early. We can do it early because being you being cardiologist, you can take the call. If one example, I will say, patient had a refractory hypertension, young lady, young girl, she had cardiomyopathy, and there is a renal artery, there is also a hypertension. So in that case, unless the hypertension is not controlled, which requires a renal artery stenting, it is very difficult. So we had this case 2 years ago. So it depends. It also depends on the patient's condition. In a stable state, in ideal scenario, we try to see that the patient is in the lowest dose possible of steroid or no steroid, along with the steroid sparing agent. That would be okay for from the disease point of view. And I would like to add one or two things here. One thing, though patient goes into remission, there is a data of 10 years follow-up patient where there can be flares maybe after 2 years, 5 years. They are noted that a flare can be there after 10 years also. So we need not keep the patient for immunosuppression for so long, but they should be having clinical visits to see if their disease is active or not, even though the patient doesn't require medical management. Pranit, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Shankar, you have something to add?
I've got 2-3 doubts, sir.
Yes, sir, please.
What could be the cause for this repeat? If it is correctly recorded BP 150/70 in the right upper limb, what could be the cause for this elevation in the systolic blood pressure in this case, when there are no changes and no pathological lesions in the renal arteries? Second thing is, alternative to the FDE PET scan, the old one, invasive digital subtraction angiography, that was actually, it was once upon a time, it was the gold standard in the diagnosis of Takayasu. Is it available in our care or any tertiary care center, a digital subtraction angiography, and how it scores over the PET CT? And the third one is, once suppose we want to taper the dosage of steroid, thinking that the disease progression is very late, very minimal, and once we think that the disease is burnt or inactive, what are the other surgical procedures we have to take up, like endovascular stenting or graft or reconstruction? Please highlight these surgical angioplasty, so surgical interventions after the disease is inactive. these three things. What could be the cause of this systolic BP in this case when the renal arteries are normal? And DSA, is it an alternative for this FDG PET scan? And what are the other surgical interventions once the disease is inactive?
Thank you so much, Shankar sir. I will answer two of your three questions, and then I will have Dr. Varaprasad answer the third one. So systolic blood pressure in her. So, let's be if we go back to our basics of hypertension, we have not yet established or labeled her hypertensive yet, because she had blood pressure checked 2 times, once in the doctor's visit in her hometown and once with me. Both the time she's under a lot of stress, and this is office blood pressure check. She's a young lady, and I have to give her a benefit of doubt of getting those blood pressures rechecked, particularly at home if possible, where I can first establish that she has got true hypertension. Once, in case if it is established, then we know for sure that renal artery stenosis is not the cause of it. And overall renal disease is also not a cause of it, because we have looked for her renal dysfunction. So in her case, if it does turn out to be that, then for the labeling point of view, we would label it as essential hypertension for the time being, unless we find any new problem in her. But even before going there, to clarify, I don't think we have labeled her hypertensive yet. That is number one. About your question for revascularization. So while Takayasu and other diseases are systemic in nature, the indication for revascularization are local in nature, which means that we have to look at what particular vascular bed we are concerned about, and is there any indication for revascularization there. Like in this case, she has got a left subclavian which is occluded, but she has got enough of collateral and she does not have symptoms over there, so she does not meet any criteria for revascularizing that subclavian artery. Similarly, in the middle aortic syndrome, now she only has 30% stenosis there. Even if that stenosis goes to 60, 70 or 80%, unless she manifests some degree of hypoperfusion, either in her abdomen or in her lower extremity, she does not become a candidate for revascularization. And same thing goes for renal arteries or mesenteric arteries or whatnot. And in case if she does fit into criteria for revascularization, the standard therapy would be to try endovascular first. And if endovascular does not work, or if the anatomy dictates going for a surgical, then she will go for a surgical bypass. But for most part, endovascular is feasible in these cases. But again, this is all local vascular bed indication rather than anatomy per se. So those are the two questions that you asked. And the third one about DSA for PET, I don't know of it, and I'll ask Dr. Varaprasad's opinion. In CARE, we do have DSA with us. It is just that I have not done a DSA for this particular purpose. Dr. Varaprasad, if you could share your thoughts on this question.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Yeah, DSA and PET, the difference, it is PET scan is the one important investigation. So most of the, if you want to assess disease activity and the extent of disease, PET scan is enough. Because DSA is requires intervention. You need to invasive. So in clinical practice, we use the patient. We will rather be better if we subject the patient to a conventional angiogram, where the patient may also need an intervention like stenting. So for all diagnostic purposes, like whole CT angiogram or MR angiogram, depending upon the patient profile, or a PET CT angiogram would be enough. We need not go for any previously, as the doctor said, that is a gold
Dr.
standard.
Anup, sorry for intervening in between. DSC prior to say PET scan, prior to CT scan and MRI, DSC was frequently used. And with these two methods of evaluation and angiographic evaluation, the need for that has come down significantly. We hardly use it now. It is not anywhere related to or comparable to PET scan. They are different they give different sorts of information. They have no relationship.
Thank you so much, Somaraju sir. Dr. Varaprasad, if you could please complete your thought process.
Yeah, so that Dr. Samraj has told in a simple manner. So for a patient, we reserve this conventional angiography for a patient who is planning, who may need a future intervention, or who is already a candidate for intervention. For diagnostic purposes, we are not using this. The other angiographic modalities like CT, MR, or PET are better.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. For the sake of time, we are going to
Hello,
wrap
sir.
up now. Yes, Dr. Malindra Swami, you have something to add?
Yes,
Last
sir.
2
That
minutes.
ER can be escaped. Can we tell with bicuspid aortic wall with
It can.
bicuspid aortic wall coarctation of the aorta?
It can. It is just that we have her CT scan, which says that she has got a normal tricuspid valve and she does not have any coact on the CT scan. So we have at least those findings with us.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Sir,
Suppose-
any angio gradient, anything can be taken?
Angio gradient for the aortic.
Having the descending aortic wall?
No, sir, we have not done any invasive work on her. We have not done any catheter related work on her.
For doing conventional angio and take a pullback gradient around this?
I personally wouldn't do it because there is no anatomic feature to suggest there could be a gradient forming stenosis. So I did not do it because I did not think there was any anatomic indication for it.
Because recently I've done one patient with same patient presenting with abdominal aorta stenosis. But based on the CT, it was around 40-50%. But I took a pullback gradient, the gradient having more than 50. Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
The
Yeah.
gradient came around 50 pullback.
Yeah, that is certainly something to keep in mind.
Patient
And
is
maybe this is
comfort follow up single.
Yeah. This is certainly something we can consider when we see her next. Absolutely.
Because that diameter, based on that diameter, I thought I should leave medical management so nicely it is well. Then I just will do a conventional angio with the pullback gradient. The gradient almost with the and she was comfortable with single antihypertensive we are using for her.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Let us take one last comment from Santosh, and after that we'll close it. Santosh, your comments, please.
I have a question for Rajendra sir. Sir,
Santosh, first of all, your voice is very feeble. You come close to the mic, and then you can ask.
Hello, can you hear me now, sir?
I can hear you, but you are very feeble. Please go ahead. Try.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, in the last center I have worked, all the patients of Takayasu aorta arthritis used to receive a course of anti-tubercular treatment, thinking that tuberculosis is one of the most common cause in for the aorta arthritis. So is it followed now, or if the protocols are changed, sir, or was the giving ATT was wrong in all the patients of aorta arthritis? Question number one. Question number two, what is the risk of these patients when they continue into pregnancy? What is the risk of aortic dissection in a third trimester, and what is the mode of delivery? Is it a normal delivery, or should go ahead with a cesarean section? Thank you, sir.
Dr. Varaprasad, if you could just concisely take up each of those questions.
Definitely. Regarding ATT, we don't give tuberculosis treatment for Takayasu patient unless patient has Takayasu. And the second one, dissection. I mean, it is not per se a risk factor, pregnancy causing dissection or any complications. As the sir said, patient disease can be present in pregnancy. So in refractory hypertension, that is a relative contraindication until the hypertension is controlled. But otherwise, it doesn't actually affect the kid, or the pregnancy doesn't affect the mother. That's all.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. For the lack of time, we are going to close here. Praneeth, your closing comments, 2 minutes, and then we'll be done.
Yeah, a fairly common scenario with a lot of questions being answered in today's discussion. I think evaluation, first thing, as I was opening about knowing the activity and followed by knowing the target organ involvement, and then take it forward and always take help of a rheumatologist when in doubt, rather than experiment with the patient cells. That's what I could take from the discussion today.
Thank you so much, Praneeth, and certainly a very exhaustive and pertinent discussion. Thank you all for attending today's session. My special thanks to Dr. Rajendra Varaprasad, who spared his time and shared his thoughts. To the attendees, particularly those joining us for the first time, we would like to get your feedback for the session. If you found the session worthwhile, may we request you to share it amongst your colleagues so that we can expand our discussion. We host this session every Wednesday at 7:30, and you can click the same link that you clicked today to join our future sessions as well. And if you have any feedback, please get to us. We would love to read that and incorporate. Also, from April onwards, we will be starting our huddle at 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. on the Wednesday. So we'll be doing 30 minutes early so that we finish by 8 o'clock or so. I thank you again for joining. Good night, and hopefully we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.